Can you hear the drum beats of war between Egypt and Ethiopia? Nothing good can come out of that. So let me tell you how we can silence those drum beats. But first, let me tell you how we got here. Picture the Horn of Africa as a tense chessboard, where Egypt and Ethiopia are two queens locked in a strategic battle for dominance. Each queen is attempting to checkmate the other, leveraging smaller pieces, Somalia, Somaliland, Eritrea, and Djibouti, to gain an upper hand. Their rivalry is fierce, rooted in long-standing tensions over access to the Nile River and security concerns. Egypt, seeking to corner Ethiopia, has recently made key moves. In August 2024, Egypt signed a defense agreement with Somalia, promising military support and the deployment of 5,000 soldiers under the African Union's new Support and Stabilization Mission. This mission, which replaces the previous African Union Transition Mission, one in which Ethiopia was heavily involved, gives Egypt a direct military presence in Somalia, boots on the ground in Somalia. Additionally, Egypt is already arming Somalia and deploying its troops there. On 22nd October 2024, Egypt made a consequential move on the geopolitical chessboard. On this day, an Egyptian warship delivered a second major cache of weaponry to Somalia, including anti-aircraft guns and artillery. Egypt had delivered the first cache 1 month earlier. Although it has framed this involvement as necessary to fight Al-Shabaab, it's clearly using Somalia as a pawn to position itself against Ethiopia. Egypt views Ethiopia's massive Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, which relies heavily on the Nile River, as a direct threat to its survival, since the Nile is Egypt's primary water source. Now, on the other side of the chessboard, Ethiopia is making its own power plays. Ethiopia is Africa's largest and most populous landlocked country. It desperately needs, unrestricted access to the sea. That's why in January 2024, it secured a landmark deal with Somaliland. In exchange for recognizing Somaliland's sovereignty, Ethiopia was given control of one of Somaliland's ports. Further to this, it was granted a naval base on Somaliland's coast, bypassing Somalia's control and reducing its dependence on Djibouti's ports. This move infuriated Somalia, which still considers Somaliland part of its territory. This move drove Somalia into Egypt's arms for protection. Some might therefore argue that it's Somalia which is using Egypt and not the other way around. Either way, these two countries have found a common enemy in Ethiopia. At the same time, Ethiopia is forging ahead with the Renaissance Dam project, disregarding Egypt's repeated warnings and threats. The dam, seen by Ethiopia as essential for its energy and development needs, remains a major flashpoint between these two nations. The other pieces on the chessboard, Eritrea and Djibouti, are being tactically maneuvered as well. Eritrea, once a close ally of Ethiopia in its conflict against the Tigray People's Liberation Front, has recently shifted its stance. It is now aligning with Egypt and Somalia, creating a united front against Ethiopia. This complicates Ethiopia's position further, as Eritrea's strategic location and influence in the region give Egypt an additional ally in its bid to checkmate Ethiopia. Djibouti, while maintaining a more neutral stance, holds significant importance as Ethiopia's historical gateway to the sea. With Ethiopia's new port agreement with Somaliland, Djibouti could potentially lose its strategic leverage, though it remains a critical player. International players, the UAE, USA, Russia, and China, are hovering around this chessboard, eyeing opportunities to influence the outcome. The UAE has invested heavily in Somaliland's port development, and has a vested interest in securing its economic foothold in the region. This puts UAE on the side of Ethiopia and Somaliland and against Egypt. Remember, in Sudan, UAE supports the Rapid Support Forces while Egypt supports the Sudanese army. China, with its significant infrastructure investments, including in Djibouti, also stands to be affected by the shifting dynamics. Russia, keen to expand its geopolitical influence, may align with either side, depending on where its strategic interests lie. Meanwhile, the US, with its long-standing role in the region, could intervene for its own strategic and selfish interests, especially if the conflict disrupts anti-terrorism efforts or regional security. As the two queens, Egypt and Ethiopia, continue their strategic maneuvers, a proxy war is becoming an increasing risk. Egypt's military presence in Somalia, coupled with Ethiopia's recognition of Somaliland, have created new flashpoints. Both sides are using their alliances with smaller states and external powers to strengthen their positions, heightening tensions across the Horn of Africa. The instability risks spilling over into wider conflict, drawing in other nations and global powers, unless diplomatic de-escalation is prioritized. For now, the potentially catastrophic chess game rages on, with the threat of a proxy war looming large across this volatile Horn of Africa region. So how can these war drumbeats be silenced? For starters, both Ethiopia and Egypt must realize that there can be no military solution to this matter. Military action will lead to a stalemate and to avoidable loss of life. We, the African people, must ensure that peace prevails in the Horn of Africa region.